My name's Jeff Smithers, and together with my co-organiser and co-moderator of this session, Herbert Stone, we'd like to welcome you to this session on food safety, and particular the integration of traceability, blockchain technology, and the Food Safety Modernisation Act. Before we introduce our first speaker, I thought I'd spend just a few minutes in setting the scene with some opening comments. I've often used this quote from Carol Brookins. It's now some 20 years old, but perhaps more relevant today than it was back in 99. And it sets in, I guess, stark relief what we're all trying to do in the food industry, and that is meet consumer demands. And consumers, we're all consumers, can be pretty demanding. And if you read this quote, it's both accurate and a little humorous towards the end. But as I say, it sets in stark relief the fact that we are attempting in everything we do to meet what consumers are demanding. They're becoming more educated, more aware of what's going on in the industry, and they're demanding a lot from the food they eat. But as we go about trying to meet these consumer demands, it's important to recognise that food safety can never be compromised. It's an absolutely non-negotiable characteristic of the food we manufacture and the food we eat. And in fact, we have an obligation as members of the food industry in all our various respects to deliver on food safety. But delivering on food safety in this modern world, this globalised world, can be very challenging. And I guess this quote from the World Health Organization from last year really captures how challenging that can be. The journey from where our food comes from to how it ends up on our plate is longer and more complex than ever before. Food safety risks exist at every step. Our food safety and control systems must adapt and work together across sectors along the entire food chain. And I guess this quote from the WHO really captures the purpose and the aim of today's symposium. And that is, how do we take modern science and technology together with a modern regulatory environment and integrate it all together for an outcome that delivers on food safety. So it's about choice, application, adaptation of relevant science and technology tools. How do we integrate those effectively across the entire food chain? And how do we integrate that science and technology with a modern regulatory environment? And today we have three speakers, very good speakers, who will address a number of aspects of this adaptation and integration across the food chain. So I'd now like to hand over to my co-moderator, Herbert Stone, who will introduce the first speaker.
Good morning and welcome to our program. That's the extent of my remarks. I'd like to start off focusing on the speakers because that's where the attention should be. Our first speaker is, will prove the other two, are very impressive with a wonderful background and understanding about food safety and the implications of it. Maria Savio has a very impressive background. She has more than 20 years of experience in the food-related experience in other industries. Before joining IFT as the Chief Science and Technology Officer, she served as VP of Nutrition, R&D for grains, dairy, cohort platforms at PepsiCo. She's going to talk with us this morning about traceability, and this program is to set a stage for what we hope will be subsequent years where we have speakers come in and talk about how they're making use of traceability and food safety and connecting them all to the consumer. Maria?
Good morning. It is my pleasure today to stand in front of you and talk about. It's my pleasure to stand in front of you and talk about traceability. I would like to start by sharing the IFT's vision and mission, because safety is at the heart of everything we do. Our vision is to have a world where science and innovation are universally accepted as essential to safe, nutritious, and sustainable food supply for all. And this is exactly where traceability fits in. And our mission is to advance the science of food and its application in the global food system. I would like to start this presentation in framing up the megatrends that are shaping our industry today, from seed all the way to consumer, and arguably the way that the product is disposed. We are seeing a lot of changes that they are generational in nature, and these changes are challenges but also opportunities. We have an imperative for food security and sustainability that is driving the demand for higher production. We're seeing more and more urbanization, and we're seeing the natural resources coming under tremendous pressure, not only because we have to produce more food, but because we are seeing massive climatic changes. And also we're seeing government policies that they are going in different directions. But one thing that is undisputable is that you cannot separate food policy from environmental policy. The two things are intertwined. When you go into consumers and industry, we are seeing the consumers demanding everything. And I love the way Jeff started this session by saying that the consumer today wants everything. They want quality, they want cost, they want accessibility, nutrition, they want values. And actually there is a lot of skepticism about science. I sincerely hope that this skepticism will fade away and science will come back to the fore, but at the moment there is a lot of skepticism. And when we talk about the consumer, it is not just the affluent consumer in developed markets. We need to think of the urban poor and the agrarian poor in so many geographies that they do not have access to good food. Another thing that we are seeing is that innovation is a process that's been disrupted itself right now. You know, we cannot innovate fast enough, and the speed of innovation in the technology arena is setting a new standard that the traditional industries like the food industry are really struggling to match up. So what is happening with science, technology, and policy? Well, a lot of disruption happening there too. We're seeing the merging of biology, medicine, and food into new interdisciplines. And at the same time, we're seeing less money being invested in research in the science of food. We're seeing rapid technology advancement in digitization and data management that they're actually going to transform the way the food chains are set up today. And arguably, the food industry is not at the forefront of this change, but things are changing. That's why we're here today talking about traceability. And then we're seeing another phenomenon, which is the laws and regulations in the different territories in the different countries. They are not really converging, but they're diverging. You know, what's happening with GMO between the US and Europe. So this is a big background that we need to bear in mind when we think about where food safety and traceability is heading in the future. I would like to share with you some noteworthy statistics. It's nothing short of a miracle that the food supply chains that we have today, they're as safe and reliable as they are. But we should not take this for granted, because they're always that far away from something catastrophic happening. And the bigger you are, the bigger the impact is. The more pressure you put on the system, the higher the probability is for an event to happen with massive consequences. And I want to share those three things. Global trade. In the past 19 years, actually 16 years in this statistic, we have seen global trade rising threefold to 1.7 billion tons. The expectation is that between now and 2050, we're going to see the demand for global trade rise again by a factor of 3. So today, 70% of the world food supply is is 17% of the world food supply is based on global trade. We expect this to go up to 50%. Also, food waste and packaging. We are producing a lot of food and we're wasting a lot of food. We have losses post-harvest, very big losses in countries with low infrastructure, up to 70%, whereas in the developed world, we're seeing 17% post-harvest. But in the developed world, we're wasting 40% of the food that has been produced. And also we're using a lot of packaging materials. And only 14% of those packaging materials are recyclable. I don't need to dwell on this. I think this is something that is top of mind for the industry, for consumers, and for very many academic institutions and nonprofits. And the last but not least, food safety is stretched. The supply chains are stretched. The USDA statistics show us that between in the space of 5 years, we have seen the recalls doubling from less than 100 to 150, and this is really alarming. So this is a typical supply chain, value chain, you may argue. For the food system, you can argue that it can represent really a food chain in similar kind of sectors. But what we are seeing here, and what you see in green is the hardcore, the key business of producing food. And what you see in yellow is areas that are emerging. So we are seeing a significant rise and adoption of new types of equipment, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, blockchain standards, extremely important. And there are big areas that are emerging, like personalized nutrition and the need for disposal. The supply chains do not stop at the consumer, they should stop at the disposal end. And at the very front, we're seeing research and discovery and translational research and interdisciplinary areas emerging. We need to expand our horizons and our boundaries beyond the green space. If we're going to be successful, we need to really embrace the entire value chain. This is what supply chain looks like, the complexity of it in real life. But actually, this is the complexity that we need to manage and handle when something goes wrong. When we have, let's say, a foodborne disaster, this is what authorities and industry have to come to terms with and act very quickly. How do you handle a system like this? It is not a linear system, and it is not an one up and one down system. So around about 2010 and before FSMA, the FDA approached the Institute of Food Technologists, asking them to lend their expertise in actually developing some pilots in preparation for FSMA. And I want to show you here the work that was done all those years ago, and some of the very significant outcomes coming from those trace back and trace forwards and recommendations that they were actually encoded in FSMA in section 204. But that was almost 10 years ago. And I want to highlight the significance of starting early in this journey, because these things are new, and these things, they take a lot of resources, they take a lot of experts and expertise and organization to come to fruition. So that was the genesis of IFT's involvement in traceability. And in 2013, IFT established the Global Food Traceability Center, which is responsible for actually organizing Traceability Central, this event that we are standing here today. It's extremely important to talk about standards. And there are different types of standards. We have management standards, we have equipment standards, we have technical and process standards. But ultimately, we need to have standards to establish a common language upon which we're going to build business processes, and we're going to build technical expertise and digital systems. So traceability is the systematic ability to track and trace the path of food ingredients all the way from the beginning to the end. And IFT has coined two very important mechanisms. One is the critical tracking events, and the other one is the key data elements. A critical tracking event, for instance, is the location at the time when something was harvested or caught. The key tracking event is something that has happened in the supply chain. But at the heart of this is interoperability. Supply chains are very complex, they're not linear, and in the food industry, we all know we actually rely on a lot of commingling to ensure supply continuity. One of our key focus areas for the Global Food Traceability Center is our partnership with WWF to establish and run the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability. It is an international business-to-business platform, and we're focusing on seafood. We are funded by the Moore Foundation, who are investing millions of dollars in seafood. Seafood is arguably one of the most challenging and the least developed in terms of traceability. We have issues with authentication, we have issues with labor, we have all sorts of issues, and we're making huge strides with an amazing ecosystem of companies and nonprofit organizations and others in moving this agenda forward. And there is going to be a presentation on this tomorrow. Let me talk a little about our 4 strategic pillars. We are running pilots and traceability system evaluations across a number of agricultural commodities and other finished products. We develop and run educational materials. We're also developing open source tools and software. It's extremely important to have agnostic solutions. We want the small and medium-sized suppliers to participate in the economy, and we want them to thrive, and we want them to do well. Not everybody can afford to buy specific products. So we as a nonprofit, we are committing to providing this kind of solutions. And of course, as I said earlier on, we are focused very much on standards and working together on the seafood dialogue. This is an example of how we are running interoperability pilots. Again, we are starting with different sources of ingredients. We're starting with different companies that they work together pre-competitively, or they may elect to participate only in part of that pre-competitive partnership. Then we're looking at the primary and secondary processing. We collect the data, we translate the data into then foundations to enable software development, and then we connect this data all the way to the end. And the end is retailers, but also food service. Extremely important to talk about this part of the food business. In the US alone this year, we have seen that for the first time ever, that 51% of the dollars consumers spend goes to food service bought food. So the grocery bills are now in the minority. The majority are looking to buy their food from outside the home. So this is a foundation for how we run our pilots. And I would like to close this by putting in front of you the vision. How do all these pieces connect together? When we started this journey almost 10 years ago, we had traceability at the top. Now we flipped it and we said, actually, traceability is the backbone. Traceability is something that can carry so many needs and functionalities and utilities for the supply chain. So traceability starts with chain of custody, but actually can deliver food safety, must deliver food safety. The two things are intertwined. When you deliver food safety, you need to deliver quality. It's so important to know what happened in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. The finished product should really reach the consumer the way that it was designed. Sustainability, values to the consumer, and actually making sure that we are taking care of that disposal part of the equation. And of course, provenance and authenticity, tamper evident, tamper resistant. It all ladders up to transparency. Transparency and assurance are absolutely fundamental for trust. But to do this, you do need to have a very good focus and expertise and partnerships on global standards. You need to be on top of technologies. And of course, you need to always bear in mind efficiencies, because companies who will adopt these systems and processes, they need to make sure that they have a return for their investment and they can scale it up. So this is the vision for the future. We are on a journey, but this journey for sure is really catching fire in our industry and will continue to grow. Thank you.
We have just a couple of minutes for some questions. We will also anticipate having more time at the end of the session for additional questions. But there are one or two questions that nobody wants to ask a question. You've overwhelmed them.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. You had mentioned small and medium-sized processors. I think that I can't remember the term you exactly used. How do you plan on getting this information out to those small or medium-sized organizations?
Thank you for your question. There are a number of avenues to do this. One avenue is through our pilots. We're actually engaging small and medium-sized companies. Another one is we are partnering with the FDA, and we have made a very clear statement to the FDA that part of our solutions are for this part of the economy. So these are two examples of how we're engaging with small to medium companies. And the other one is really part of our future strategy to spread out the word through communication and building partnerships.
No other questions? We can thank Maria, and we can continue with the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Emily Lyons. She is an attorney with the firm Bush Blackwell in Washington. It's a good place to be when it comes to a topic like this. Her work, her practice focuses on assisting food companies, clients navigate really how do you deal with the legal issues when it comes to global trade, and food certainly is a key part of global trade, and the problems that you encounter in dealing with all kinds of products with all kinds of regulations. And one interesting part of this is blockchain. And I know all of you have heard about it. I'm sure you all have great ideas and know all about it, but I suspect we'll probably find out we don't know anything. In any case, please join me in welcoming Emily to the podium. Somebody else.
Hi everyone. You may be wondering, why is an attorney up here talking about blockchain when there are many service providers who actually provide solutions for this technology and also its adoption in the food system? But part of the reason is there are a number of different people that are looking at this, and I happen to work with a number of attorneys that work mainly in the financial systems area. So obviously they have worked very closely with banks and other regulated entities, as well as in the cryptocurrency space, that have looked at this technology. Wow, that's one of the first times I've ever been told I wasn't loud enough. Or not using a microphone correctly. But basically, because blockchain takes both traditional regulatory concepts of tracking and tracing your food, and then also brings together lots of business questions. That's why attorneys are really involved in this blockchain space, just like in the blockchain technology space, just like a lot of others. So what is blockchain? I'm sure you all have heard this general definition that blockchain is a distributed ledger technology, and it has many features. First of all, it's a digital ledger. It uses a decentralized network, generally of machines that operate as nodes that are interconnected to each other through peer-to-peer connections. There's generally transparency between members that are part of this system, whether it's a consortium or whether it's a public blockchain. And I hear the word immutable records all the time. Technically, which means, the records can't be changed. But really, the way that blockchain technology works is there's tamper-evident and tamper-resistant data records. you can technically change information that is on a blockchain. It's just very, 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 very difficult. And there's generally a record of how those changes have been made. And the other piece is that there's interoperability between the systems. So the computers all talk to each other is the best way to put it. So how did blockchain technology evolve? Really, blockchain technology is a mix of computer science and cryptographic technologies that were developed in the 80s and 90s, but really brought together in a paper in 2008 talking about blockchain and its use for Bitcoin. As you know, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, or if you haven't heard of Bitcoin, it's a cryptocurrency that allows anonymous individuals that participate in a public blockchain in order to transfer money basically between each other, or this cryptocurrency between each other without a central authority, which means there's no government that is behind this, or a company or an individual that's actually running this program. And that was initially kicked off in 2009. In 2012, another cryptocurrency, Ethereum, was developed. And then there have been a couple of other systems called Hyperledger, DApp, and then initial coin offerings eventually were developed. And now that we're in 2018 and 2019, we're seeing that this technology has next generation capabilities outside of the cryptocurrency space. The reason that there are so many applications for blockchain is because it has those characteristics of tamper-evident records that allow you to follow it along the chain and understand what transactions or changes have been made to records. There are applications, obviously, in transportation and logistics, following money, food and agriculture, identification for individuals, confirming identity for voting, following titles and deeds in transactions related to real estate is actually very important. Its adoption and integration into the Internet of Things. Diamond supply chains are very complex. Obviously, everybody wants conflict-free diamonds, so that supply chain transparency on where your diamond has come from and how it was mined. And then also there's a lot of interest in using blockchain technology or similar technologies in medical records. The Department of Health and Human Services is actually looking at a way to introduce not necessarily blockchain technology as it is called at this point in time, but some of those principles into how patient records are stored and shared between different medical groups, different doctors, as well as with the patient. So, I mentioned this a little bit, but this is how, distributed networks and conventional networks work. Generally, how many of you use like file share or Google Docs or any of those kinds of management systems? So that is what you're going to call, that's the one on the far right, or my far right, your left, is a centralized system where there's one copy of the data that many computers or nodes have access to. And it's in one place. There's one copy, changes are made. You might not be able to track them, but that's where they exist. However, in a distributed network, it's out on several synced devices. It can be smartphones, it can be computers, it can be in many different places. But it's basically, in this case, 10 identical copies of the document that exist everywhere. And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to mess with or alter the records that are included in the blockchain. So just a couple of pieces of, terminology. Blockchain technology is the technology as a whole. The blockchain is actually the ledger, the digital ledger in this case, that is made up of different blocks of information that we're going to talk about in just a minute. So when you look at traditional storage data, if you compare this to how you looked at that on the network, every time you save a file, it's a new independent file. Yes, you can overwrite in some instances or change the file name, but it's independent of each other. I can make changes to my own document and save it on my computer and maybe attempt to upload it, but it doesn't necessarily speak to each other, but they're all separate data sets. Now, however, when you look at blockchain, there are a couple of different pieces that kind of tie together. So you have your initial file, which is file A, and on your blockchain, you add new blocks throughout your process. And each file is time stamped to the next and the previous block, and they're all connected to each other in time. So when you compare it to the previous slide, they're separate blocks. And this piece of adding them, I'll talk about in a minute, but that depends on what kind of consensus mechanism you're using. So who decides when a block is generated, which can be very complex when applied to food. So if you look at a traditional, data security, there are different pieces that may change. So it's difficult to know when the active file is different than the original file, when something has been changed and what has been changed. Yes, in a Word document or something like that, you can do track changes, but that doesn't work for all the document management systems we use in the food supply chain. And because they're not necessarily communicating with each other, or you can't necessarily track from A to H the way that you can in a blockchain, it's different to know how those differences were created and why they were created. So when you look at this, there are several elements that are part of your individual block in the blockchain. So every file has a name, every file has a timestamp, and then when you look at subsequent blocks in the chain, they're called hashed. So that's what the A hash is, which is what helps you say that B has the information and is tied back to block A. So only new blocks are added. You're never replacing your files. You are recording. Basically what happens is you record different transactions that occur in your stage. So for example, in a food system, it could be at step A, your block may be the harvest block, or that's the original block. And we'll talk about this in a very specific example. And then that's at a specific time. You've been able to capture that in a specific moment. And when you move to B, it could be processing. And you may do several steps in processing. So we're going to talk about a fish example, but it could be filleting, it could be skinning, it could be deboning, it could be several different steps that are recorded as transactions. And depending on how your consensus mechanism is set up, that may be an individual block itself, each of those different steps, or it may be one full block itself recorded as transactions and tied back to your A. So basically, the reason why people say that blockchain is immutable is because the data from A is tracked all the way down, or at least able to be tied back, so you can see where changes are made. So basically, a hacker, in order to, actually change what's in your blockchain, would have to go back to each of the different blocks and make changes to that data in the exact same way in order for it to not be able to be seen. So some people wonder, well, we hear about blockchain technology and how everybody needs to be using it, but when is it most appropriate to be used? And, as I tick off some of these things, you'll see where it may apply in a food context. So there are many participants. There are a lot of participants in the food value chain and in your supply chain itself. There are distributed participants, AKA you're in different locations, whether it's around the world, around the country, or even in the same city. You have a want or need due to a lack of a trusted third party. Maria talked a little bit about how complex and how not as well mapped out the seafood supply chain is. That's an example where, we've had issues with knowing, is this the fish that is declared as this fish? Was it actually fished in the country, if you're doing wild catch or anything like that, or was it grown and harvested in that area? And do we have that trust in our supply chain to believe that that's true? Additionally, the workflow is transactional in nature. So in the case of Bitcoin, it tracks, I sold, $17 or 17 Bitcoins of my 20 Bitcoins that I have. So I keep 3, and that's one transaction listed, but I transfer 17 to Bob. So when my block gets split, I keep my 3, he takes his 17, but because it's a transaction where I transferred it to him, you can see that follows him, and in my block that transaction is done. And this is the same with supply chain. We have a lot of supply chain information that we need to share with each other in the food system, where it is, I transferred this ingredient to you, this packaging, to where we're able to, share this information as it follows that batch or that lot or that, it could even be a tote of whatever it is that you're purchasing. Additionally, especially when it comes to depending on the type of system that you have, whether it's a public or a permissionless or a permissioned system, which is generally private blockchains, whether or not the system is secure to identify the owners. So there are sometimes questions, and we'll talk about this a little bit in some applications on where it could work in the food system on, for example, facility registrations for foreign facilities. There are times where there is fraud. There are individuals who attempt to register a food facility that don't have authority to register a foreign food facility, or they may, but FDA really needs to know, did they have the authority to do that? And this allows verification of the identity of the individual who's attempting to register that food facility, and then also that they have that approval, which could be followed or at least applied in a blockchain technology context. Additionally, whether there's a need to reduce or eliminate manual reconciliation of your ledger. Again, it's a ledger. These are record-keeping practices. And then also whether or not you need to be able to resolve disputes that occur. It's not as important necessarily in the food context on this. It could be if you're looking at an application where somebody's saying, this is organic, I have an organic certification with it, but if we've monitored what's been going on, at least in international grain trade related to organics, and in some cases in domestic, there have been questions about, especially imported grains, on whether or not they're actually organic. And this could help resolve that dispute because you're able to see this grain was produced here, here's its certification, which is included in your block, and it followed me all the way to here where I'm using it as a food processor. Also, the need to enable real-time monitoring of activity, as we'll talk about in a context that is, something where blockchain has been adapted and used in the food system. It's very fast because your ledger is there all in one place. And then also the need to have, full-scale view of the digital assets and transparency of transaction history. So what has been done, where has it occurred, and why was it done is all recorded in your blockchain. So some possible applications, we've heard a lot about it in the food safety context. Obviously can help with traceback for recalls. There's also possibilities on tracking livestock for disease or carcass quality purposes. The meat industry has been looking at that quite a bit. There's also confirming the authenticity of prior notice for imported foods to make sure that the food you provided prior notice on is actually there. Food facility registrations, that's a possibility where FDA may look to implement it. Real-time access to commodity prices and market data. It's very difficult to get global commodity prices and market data that can be deemed quote unquote accurate if you're a global grain buyer, and blockchain is a potential solution for that. Additionally, managing different assets, including transactions and payments for grain or livestock dealers. This is a very highly regulated industry when you're looking at buying and trading grain and livestock, and this is a way that could actually help ensure that payments are made and payments are received. Additionally, when you connect it in with other technologies, it can be used for things such as verifying soil quality, field application, weather and farming practices, because consumers want to know everything. You can show that when I planted this crop, when you integrate it with things like other technologies that are able to record this, you're able to show that I did this specific thing. I applied this fertilizer on this day, and it was appropriate because of this instance. Combating food fraud. If you're able to ensure that this olive oil is olive oil from the country that it says it is, that economic adulteration may be able to be reduced or eliminated. Obviously, there's applications in supply chain verifications, whether it's organic, free range, grass fed, you name it, it can be in there. And any other kind of supply chain transparency programs that consumers seem to want. Things like sustainable sourcing, country of origin, or farm labor. And then also it can help with inventory management. It can help me as a food processor know I need more of this item, and if you're able to communicate it back to your supplier or communicate it to your retailer where they need more. We'll say fluid milk is something that's really, really hard to manage inventory-wise. They can communicate better with their processors about, what they need to be able to change their processing to ensure that, there's some reductions in food waste. So federal agencies are also extremely interested in blockchain. USDA and several of its constituent agencies are looking at this. The Agricultural Marketing Service is probably the furthest along in several blockchain potential adoptions. One is specifically in organic. They're looking at adopting blockchain technology in order, especially like I mentioned with international grain trade, because we don't produce enough organic grain in the United States to supply our own demand for organic foods in the US. And they're looking at working very closely with Customs and Border Patrol in order to make an integrated blockchain-based system that would help track and verify that this grain actually has a certification. It was produced, and if it's maybe not grain coming in, but it's a grain product like an oil seed or something like that, tracking that it is verified there. APHIS is looking at it so that's the Animal Health Plant Inspection Service. They're looking at integrating it in animal health papers and imported products, ensuring that the product is from the region. We have certain regions where we can buy certain animal products from, specifically in the meat area, dealing with, disease concerns for foot and mouth, African swine fever, all of these other things where they can verify some of that health paper information that either follows live animals or verifies where a processed meat product comes in. And then FDA obviously is very interested in this. Maria said their IFT is working closely and has partnered with FDA on their traceability concerns. And with Frank Yanis being, in charge of food safety and traceability, I think is what his new title is, coming from Walmart and having a large background in the use of blockchain, or at least interest in the food safety and food tracking context. FDA's blueprint for an era of new food safety that they announced about a month ago didn't say blockchain in name, but it did indicate that adopting advanced technologies like blockchain in connection with artificial intelligence or machine learning may be actually very helpful to help with both traceback and ensuring food safety for consumers. So they're all looking at this. So it's really important that companies are tracking this. While I don't think FDA is ever going to say you have to adopt blockchain, they will open the doors to say, here's how you might be able to adopt it and integrate it into your system. And PC is going to talk about how it works in the FSMA context. So I just have a couple of examples. This is just a general one, but talking about seafood, again, your blocks are going to depend on what your consensus model looks at. In this case, the blocks are built based on different actions. And you can see the information that's recorded. The salmon is caught. It's in Alaska. It's a salmon. We provide you a fish number, and then here's a date. And as you follow it down, you follow the different steps. So it's filleted and packed. You may include a couple extra blocks, depending on how your system is set up on transportation. Does it sit at a distribution facility for a while? This one looks at, you prepared it for dinner in Kansas City, and it was still a fillet number, so portion number 2 from this one salmon. And you can see that the hash data of block 1, it ties it back. So that's kind of the hashing system. The numbers don't really make any sense unless you have the full chain in front of you, but that helps you tie it back along the chain. And then there it was served. So say, for example, there is a listeria outbreak related to these salmon. This would provide you, when the CDC goes and does all of their interviews with individuals to find out what they ate, finding commonalities in food, and trying to figure it out. This information is all on one block, and you can find it, and you may be able to figure out it was introduced at the processing facility very quickly, what facility, where it was processed, how it was processed. So, there's just, it'll be a lot faster because it's all in one place versus you go and do your interview and you're like, okay, so it looks like these 50 people all ate salmon at this one restaurant. But we got to figure out where they got that salmon, because this is a restaurant that does catch of the day, and it may be from a different fishmonger or from a different, processed seafood facility. They don't have a dedicated supplier. And this just makes it a little bit faster because everything is tied together. And you could also, if this was a retail step, obviously the last step would be it being sold. So if a consumer got sick, the grocery store or the retailer would have some information to be able to trace back where they got the seafood from as well. It's just taking basically our one step forward, one step back, and putting it on steroids and going way faster. Obviously, Walmart has implemented blockchain. They first did a pilot program with mangoes back in 2017. They worked with IBM in a consortium that they established, or that IBM established really with many of their suppliers to track mangoes from shelf to tree, or from tree to shelf. And in this case, it happened to be sliced mangoes. So it's a little bit different because instead of following a discrete mango from point A to point R, basically for retailer, they were able to, they did sliced mangoes instead, which involves some commingling. But what used to take about 7 days for tracking, Walmart was able to take back to 2.2 seconds after they adopted blockchain technology. They've also adopted this, or at least launched it, for leafy greens for some of their stores. So that's where their consortium, what sets up the rules for how the blockchain works, when specific blocks are added to the chain, to work with some of their other partners in this, because it's very hard to just set up on your own. And then another one that's actually very interesting is beef chain. It's the first USDA process verified program. This was actually just announced a couple of weeks ago. And this is more a supply chain program to receive value added as a farmer. Basically, it's Wyoming beef producers who generally focus on grass-fed beef, incorporate the use of RFID tags and other Internet of Things technologies for cow-calf ranch operations to be able to track basically from ranch to retailer, including that these animals are produced through feedlot, where it may be one farm initially and then they get commingled all together into, with other animals from processing and then into retail. In this case, it's mainly steaks, so beef steaks, it may be ground beef and a few other things, but they're able to communicate this with consumers through a QR code that they're able to scan and trace back to know what farm that cow came from. And then they also have a program for sheep, but this is, I don't know how many of you know about process verified, but basically USDA kind of says this is an approved or verified process that works, that can establish whether it's a supply chain system or a value add declaration that you want to make on your food. That just recently happened, which is great. So we're probably going to be seeing more adoption of this in ways. Obviously, value added is a little bit different than food safety considerations. So some of the things that we need to think about practically and legally in application to food, because there are more things if you look at adopting it in your business for things like smart contracts or following payments or anything like that. But how is this going to work for complex supply chains? When you think about beef chains, they were following steak, which is pretty easy. It's a steak, it's not easy to know exactly what cow it came from, but through beef chains, they're able to do that. But think about a sausage. Think about all of the parts of the cow that we use to make so many different products. We use everything. The beef production area is a waste not, want not, and that's how most of the food system is anyway. So how are you going to follow that and making sure that you're able to communicate this across different blockchain technologies? Because I may adopt one thing for one retailer, or for one customer. How is that going to work if some new customer comes to me and wants to also use this information to make sure that it's interoperable? Another piece to consider is who can participate. Is this going to be set up like one of the service providers that already exists, like IBM's system? It is a private blockchain, or do we want to go towards a public one? But at least with private, you're able to change permissions on who can read, who can edit things, how they can view different blocks in the chain. Who's going to bear the cost, I think, is the biggest question for the food industry. Your service providers, that exist and are all around us right now will be able to tell you how much it would cost for you to adopt it within your company. But is this something that's going to be passed down to consumers or not? Are they willing to bear that? Or are we going to get to a point where FDA does require the adoption of some advanced or increased tracking technology and system? And then who's going to set the rules of your consensus mechanism or the standards that you follow within it, especially if conflicts in data does arise? It's also really important to who's going to set the standards to make sure that systems interoperate with each other. It doesn't make sense to adopt one technology if someone else isn't going to be able to accept how you've set up your information in your block or in your own chain. And then how is the data shared? Is it restricted? Are there confidentiality problems with the information that you're putting in your block? What transactions you're recording? Who owns that data? When we think about big data, there's always question on who owns what within that data. Who also owns the intellectual property behind the system? And how is liability shared if problems arise? Say I'm able to figure out that this was a contamination problem at the farm level for a fresh fruit or vegetable. But do I have liability if I process it into something somewhere else and am not able to eliminate that? And then also what regulatory framework is going to apply, if any. So with that, I can take some questions, but I know we're probably tight on time.
I just want to remind the audience that the exam at the end will be multiple choice. We can take one or two questions. Yes, wait, we gotta.
Yeah. Hi.
Oh, somebody got this.
Hello? Okay. Hi, Emily. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question about if there is anyone that is not from a single source ingredient, because you're talking about trials with mangoes and beef. I'm in the prepared foods world, so it's pretty messy. Just trying to figure out with the number of ingredients that go into one product. So is anyone trying this? And the other question is, what type of architecture in terms of technology is needed for this technology to succeed?
So are there prepared foods that are looking at this? Yes, most of those companies are still trying to figure it out, I guess is the best way to put it, because the supply chain is so complex. It's hard enough to set up your supply chain program under FSMA, let alone add an advanced technology that might help you run that. I have not seen anything public, nor any of the companies that we've been working with, considering this technology adoption, have done that yet. As to the architecture piece, I'm going to leave that to one of the many service providers that are provided around us that have blockchain technology. I'm not a computer scientist, but I can tell you, generally, you should be able to adopt this fairly easily in the context of you already are keeping these records for supply chain purposes to begin with, whether it was FSMA or business reasons or anything like that. But it will take computer systems because this works on, generally on a cloud-based system. It may be different depending on the technology that you adopt, but the architecture may depend on the service you use.
Hi, Emily. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. I have a question that somebody needs to upload the data, right, in
Yes.
the blockchain. So in that case, how we will control that this person is not manipulating the data in the...
So I think that's hard. It's the same with any data management system, garbage in, garbage out. You just have to have some trust within your people that the data that they're uploading to the block is appropriate. Now, when it comes to cryptocurrencies, it's a little bit different because there are, verification steps where everybody on that block has to verify that that information is correct. In the food system, I think it's a little bit different because we're recording what we did versus what we're trying, like a transaction that we're trying to achieve. So it's a little bit different. But again, it takes trust in your people. There can be some verifications, especially if you adopt another technology like, food sensors or something like that in your processing facility that can verify that the information you're doing is correct.
Thank you.
So advanced technologies, combining them all together is better than one technology on its own that's really just in a really advanced Excel spreadsheet.
Just to kind of capitalize off of what he said. So that human component, what layers of accountability are there currently?
Well, I mean, it's going to depend on your blockchain technology system. But what's currently, like me representing food companies, like what prevents, you know, Joe, your QA guy, from uploading incorrect information? Is that what you're asking?
So essentially, like I've heard some information about like retinal scans or fingerprints or things like that. I mean, do you know anything about that at all? Or
I mean, you can adopt that for document management systems. However, I mean, I think about my data and but there are ways to verify that the individual is who they say they are that's uploading the information, but that doesn't prevent data integrity problems.
well, so and that's what I mean. Like it, not necessarily identifying, but like who actually was the person that did it.
I mean, now currently, sure, some people do have, different systems for, being able to log into your computer to track who it says is doing it. But I don't necessarily know of too many companies that are using biometric scanners, for example, to verify that I am Emily inputting this information specifically. But it is something that could be adopted. It's just the capital investment might not be something that a company is willing to absorb at this point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we have our final speaker in this session. This is Dr. Oh, I'm going to speak up. I hope you can hear me in the other side there. Very good, thank you. So our next speaker is Dr. Fernando Vasavada. He is an emeritus professor from the University of Wisconsin. I better mention the River Falls, Wisconsin campus.
The lab wasn't part of their kit. We just have it.
I know he wants it, so I'm gonna give it to him. But I'm just gonna. Wait. You're gonna. I'm gonna. It's not gonna hurt anything. I promise you.
PCV and Associates.
For you as well.
He's recognized
No, on the handheld.
Because I'm programmed to that. You got me? Yeah. So it'll be good to go. It'll be good to go.
ORISC, another common abbreviation, which probably has some significant meaning. Anyway, he is going to talk with us about.
You want me to do it for you?
What really started all of this. Although they probably the people in my hometown in Silicon Valley would say no, they started it all. But in any case,
I didn't get to check it or anything, but I'm sure it'll be fine. I haven't muted.
Okay. Thank you, Herb.
thank you.
You come on down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Herb. Whoa. Emily was talking low and I'm talking way high. Can you guys hear me? Good. And Herb, you are not right once in your life. This was not invented in Silicon Valley. It happened in Washington, D.C. All right. What I want to talk to you about, change the pace a little bit and talk about validation and verification. You heard the word food safety. How many times? Did you count? Too many times. And this simply means if I was behind and we were worrying about how we do on a time-wise and with all the other competition, I could simply say that if you tell me this is how you're assuring food safety, are you doing it right way? And if you're doing it right way, do you have records to prove it? So anybody else can look at it and say, yep, you're doing what you say you will do, and what you do will achieve the goal that you have in assuring food safety. Any questions? This is one of those topics that is a lot of sort of confusion with some people. Some people know what they are, and then they listen to people like me and get confused more. So we're going to try to straighten out a little bit. By the way of introduction, I think Herbert did a good job. But one thing I wanted to point out that I've been in academia 35 years before I switched gears and worked with FDA for a while and started the Alliance. I'm used to be speaking in 45-minute slots, and they gave me only 25 minutes. So let's see how we will do that. But bottom line is all food system includes elements of validation verification to prove that you say what you do, that you're actually doing it, and it assures the food safety, right? Whether you look at HACCP, that's the, whether you look at Principle 6 in HACCP, whether you look at meat and poultry HACCP regulation that came from the mega regs, you look at juice HACCP, or you look at any other food safety management system, and it's a GFSI scheme or whatever else, you have to prove people that you know what you're doing and what you're doing going to assure the food safety. You with me on this? Okay. So, even though it is so simple in a nutshell, there is often confusion about the difference between validation, verification in the context of food safety management system. And part of this confusion comes from the European system versus American system. You say potato, I say potato, and then you bring in ISO in it and GFSI and all the MOUSEs, and you don't know what you're doing. Or at least you're doing the right thing, but you can prove it to people that you're doing the right thing, right? So that's where we come in. My goal today is to define and discuss the key concept, which I might have already done, discuss verification requirement for the FSMA preventive control regulation, and then PCQI, preventive control qualified individual, its role and responsibility in context of validation. And then one thing I added the last is do's and don'ts. Now your do's and don'ts might be different than mine, and we'll talk about that, but there are certain things you don't want to do when you have validation verification, and there are certain things that you should take care to do that all right. So let's look at the concept and definition. Validation is science behind your food safety. It is not taking somebody's word face value, but do you have the right food safety plan? You have to obtain evidence that control measures, if properly implemented, are capable of controlling the identified hazard. So are you doing the right things, right? Verification, on the other hand, is saying, okay, you got the plan design. Are you following it correctly? Are you following it appropriately? Are you doing the right things? There are a lot of definitions. CFR 117.3 is the legal definition from the FSMA regulations. A NACMAF, you might have heard about that. That comes from the HACCP regulations. You might have a codex definition. Again, it is you say potato, I say potato. Basically, all it means is you are validating the process you have, you're validating the controls you have, and then you're verifying that you're applying it in right ways. Verification deals with proper implementation. It's the application of methods, procedures, tests, and other evaluations in addition to monitoring. It's different from monitoring to determine whether a control measure or combination of control measure is or has been operating as intended, and to establish the validity of food safety plan. Verifications are those activities other than monitoring that determine the validity of the food safety. Now you notice the definition. They separate the monitoring from verification. Just because you monitor doesn't mean that you're verifying all the time. In short, validation is a subset of the verification activities. As a matter of fact, a new regulation, it says verification. Validation are separate. If you look at the old HACCP regulation, there's a validation and verification. And other thing is, in order to make it easier for the industry to comply with the regulations, not all preventive controls are required to be validated. Okay? All right. So, in a simplistic term, I can tell to my undergraduate students, so they'll pass the exam that he was talking about. Say what you do what you say, and prove it to me that you're doing what you say you will be doing. Okay. Validation procedures may include use of scientific principles and data. In old days, it was okay to take somebody's published paper, staple it to your plan, and say it's okay. Now you might have to do in-plant validation and actually show that it's working the way it's supposed to work. You can use expert opinion. Experts sometimes mean consultant. It costs. It's not free. Extension used to do a lot of those things. University do a lot of those things in a sort of altruistic way. Those days are gone. Okay? You get what you pay for. PCQI has to do this. Your plant person has to be involved. And nice thing about PCQI is that unlike SQL practitioner, it doesn't have to be your employee. It could be somebody else. What kind of factors would you consider when you do the validation? Well, of course, you got to do hazard analysis. So you got to know what hazards you're dealing with. Food formulation, a lot of your hazards come from formulation. And remember this, I shouldn't say it in the podium I'm standing at, but there are a lot of creative product development and chefs and the cooks and everybody else. They would introduce hazards in your product without even realizing this. Okay? So be careful when you do product for food formulation. Establish process and the change in the current process, equipment, and then deal with the regulation. One thing is very important is the published data and industry data. There are a lot of publications, but industry data are hard to come by. I'm walking on the floor talking to people, have you done validation? Well, we are done, but we can talk about it. This is a shared responsibility. If you don't talk about it, nobody knows what kind of problems you had and how can I avoid it. But I can preach till I turn blue. That's not going to change. Those are proprietary information. You should worry about that. Where do you find the information about validation? Of course, peer-reviewed scientific literature. Let me ask you something. How many of you are lately reviewed or referred to Google Scholar? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 55 people. That's actually high. Usually I don't have any hand raised. And Google Scholar is good, but that's not the only source. Regular guidance, that is your go-to source. If you tell the inspector that is inspecting your plant or auditing your plant that I got this information of FDA Dairy Hazard Guide, there will be no question. If you tell him because my consultant said so, and your consultant doesn't have a good reputation, there will be a long day. Trade association is a guidance, IDFA, GMA, there's a lot of information there. Internal and external scientific studies, and of course the extension universities would help you out there as well. How often do, and I like my first bullet, ideally you would do validation before. You will build the roof on your house before it rains. All right? But if you can't do it, you would do in the first 90 calendar days because you're instituting new system, you're putting new equipment, 90 days is good enough. And if you can't do in 90 days, because there are a complex system, your PCQI can write a justification to FDA that it's going to take us more than 90 days. And don't say indefinite more than 90 days. You got to say we expect to finish it in 150 days or whatever. So that will work that way. And you do reanalysis indicates the need for the validation. Now let's switch a gear to the preventive controls and FSMA in particular. If you read the FSMA guidelines or regulation, and I read the pre-proposal, I read the final proposal, and many times when I have trouble falling asleep, I flip to the web page and I read the proposal and I can fall asleep. FSMA is a good regulation, it's a good intention, and only thing that is required under this regulation is that you have a written food safety plan. Now, how many years you've been in business and you don't have a written food safety plan? You go on by what Bob said or he did. Why do you doing this? Because that's how John taught me to do it. John retired in 2002. You have to have a written food safety plan, and that includes verification procedure, supply chain program, and new requirement of recall plan. Okay? So here is the language, in case you want to know. A facility is required to conduct verification activities as appropriate to the facility, food, and nature of the preventive control. That is a key phrase. What is appropriate for you and your food safety plan may not be somebody else's, even if they're making the same product with the same or similar ingredients. Also, you have to do the monitoring corrective actions, calibration process of monitoring and verification instrument, product testing, environmental monitoring, and record review. I'll make a comment about product testing in a minute. That was one of the things that caused a lot of heartburns to a lot of people. And I'm so used to be testing 10 grams of sample from 1 ton of supply chain, and I'm thinking there is no salmonella. Well, let's talk about it. And you do reanalysis. So there is a process verification. In case you are saying they took my CCP away and I am really missing it. CCP is not gone. That's your process verification. Only preventive control chain you have is a process control, preventive control. That's a CCP. You got to verify the effectiveness. You got to do the equipment calibration, record review, and remember, targeted sampling and testing, not remote sampling and testing, not haphazard sampling and testing. Targeted. Does it give you the data that you want? Allergen verification, big deal. One of the biggest hazards in the industry right now is the food allergens, right? Label review is one of the main way to control this. Before, after, during, at the supply chain, label review is the main thing, and then visual inspection of equipment. For supply chain, there is a second party, third party. When I used to teach food quality assurance, I used to like my section about the audits. There is a first party audit, there's a second party audit, there's a third party audit. Why don't you like it when there's a party involved? Right? Now, when there's a party involved, some people are tough. They are the party poopers. They can make your life miserable, give you a lot of answers. Other people are the second party or third party auditors. They would say, you need to do this and this before you get the regular auditor in. Targeted sampling testing, another good way to do that. And in system verification, you'll do the reanalysis, third-party audits, and internal audit. Let's talk about verification a little bit. Product testing and environmental monitoring is a good way to do this. As a matter of fact, when the preventive control rules came out in a preliminary publication, there was a big question about how we're going to do this. The regulatory perspective is you can do product testing and environmental monitoring in any way that works for you. It is your product, your plan, your food safety system, whatever is appropriate for you. We'll just come and check it, and we find deficiency, we'll let you know. And in some cases, neither product testing nor environmental monitoring may be appropriate. So if you can show that in your case it is not applicable, you don't have to do that, okay? All right. All monitoring is required to be reviewed by the PCQI or somebody designated within 7 working days. There are a lot of records. We just heard Emily talk about the blockchain and all. You have to put a right data in your system. This will provide that there's a right data. Verification record, internal calibration, product testing, all of those things you have to do, and it has to be reviewed in reasonable time. 7 days is reasonable. If it is not, then you got to do something with your system. Also, the record review has to be performed, overseen by the PCQI. Okay, that's a preventive control qualified individual. When issues are identified during the review, corrective action is required. People used to do CAPA kind of thing, corrective actions, but this is required when you find the problem. Okay, so what about the food safety plan reanalysis? Well, even if everything is right, you're wearing your favorite shirt every day, you're going to church every Sunday, you are a devout religious person, and God forbid nothing happens to you. You still have to do the reevaluation every 3 years. This was another headache or heartache people have. Wait a minute. They tell me to do every year. Has a plan how to reevaluate every year. GFSI tells me every 2 years. Fine, do every week for all I care. But you have to do at least once every 3 years or whenever there is a reason for you to do that. When there's significant change in the product or the process, you have to do that, okay? When there's an unanticipated problem, there's a hurricane, there's a flood, there's some kind of supply chain problem, you have to do that. And then you have to make sure when you do the reanalysis, your preventive control is effective, because when you find out that your preventive control is not effective, you have to do the reanalysis. Reanalysis will include the review of the plan, of course, make sure that it's still accurate, reviewing records to identify trends and verify that food safety plan being followed. And again, it is a role and responsibility of PCQI. So we said PCQI so many times. Anybody in the audience who is a PCQI? Fantastic. Then you know what it is, right? We just saved some time. PCQI is responsible for I have a friend of mine who works in Wisconsin. He had this card made up, PCQI, a responsible person. And so you ask him, what is the responsible person? He says, anything goes wrong, I am responsible. That's a good approach to take. That's a good way to know. So let's talk about do's and don'ts. What thing you would do when you consider validation and verification? Well, doing your product operation facility. That sounds so facetious. If you don't know your product, what are you doing in the plant? You'd be surprised how many people come in the industry from somewhere left, or because my cousin has somebody working here, or worse, my brother-in-law told me to hire you, right? They would be the problem. So you have to know your product operation facility. You have to do the robust hazard analysis. You have to be aware of the industry trend, hazards, and consumer behavior. Oh my God, how are you going to predict consumer behavior? There's always an idiot in a crowd, and that's going to make your life miserable. But that's the reality. You're dealing with that. Do choose a proper target organism surrogate for process control validation, especially when you're dealing with the non-thermal processing or some of the new technology you have. You can't just use your PA3679 or whatever organism you used to use. That's a big deal. Use additional testing as necessary. Conduct verification activity at the frequency that is required by the law, and have a PCQI. Not just one PCQI, have more than one PCQI, because PCQI responses are a lot complex. Not everybody is interested in looking at the number. It's like being an accountant and being a creative artist at the same time. People are different interests, different aptitude, so you wear a PCQI doing different things. What is the don't part of the validation verification? Well, do not assume that validation for one parameter automatically transfers to other parameter. A lot of companies get into this trap. Don't use alternative testing methods. Heard the word CBD? We're doing testing. What kind of method are you using? We don't know. Are you doing testing or tasting? I mean, that's a different thing. You have to use validated method. You have to use accredited lab. Otherwise, all your data are not that effective. Don't forget to review the food plan as necessary. Don't ignore senior management's role. Now, at least from what I have observed, there is a lot of interest among senior management, especially since the peanut butter case, as the things are done right. And there are some resources, which is a good thing. And the last bullet I have, don't be complacent. It never happens to me. I'm using organic. I go to Baptist church. None of that will apply to you because Salmonella doesn't care. Listeria even less. So don't be complacent. Let's summarize. Global Food Safety Program is changing paradigm. We know that. FSMA preventive control rules require a written food safety plan. Part of it is the validation and verification. And you have to have a properly trained PCQI to implement that. So, how many of you have heard this thing before? Last 2 years, hey KJ, you heard this, right? You're talking about we educate while you regulate. Tell you what, education part is over. Now we'll regulate. Expect the FDA to require process validation to support preventive control validation and evidence that measures such as all the processing you do will control your hazard. Expect high 483s issued. There's a lot of problem with the GMP implementation. There's a lot of problem with the hazard analysis and monitoring. 483 is something that you have to respond to. It's the required correction you will have to do. So expect more of those. Safe food is a good business. I like this. I used to tell people jokingly as I teach the pathogens and all, food safety is a real requirement of food business. You know why? Because dead people don't buy anything. You kill your customer, you lost the customer forever. Good news is they won't buy somebody else's either, but as a whole, the industry is going hurting about that. Validation verification minimize potential for food safety disaster, and then it is an essential tool for regular compliance. I would venture to say that you cannot assure people that you are within the right side of the law if you don't have a proper verification validation. Won't you agree, Payman? There you go. So if you're interested in some more detailed information, this is a good source of information. Publication came out about 4 years ago. It's a practical industry-driven framework for the FSMA implementation. And it's online that you can download. Finally, I'd like to thank Jeff and Herbert for organizing this and monitoring this. I'd like to thank IFT19 for this opportunity, and then FSMA and FSPCA for all the help I have had from them in last about 7-8 years I've been involved with them. Last but not least, I want to thank you. I see some favorite and favorable and familiar faces. You know who you are. I'm glad you are here. That made my day. If I ruin your day, show me afterwards and I'll buy you a beer. Thank you.
I have to speak into this. Thank you. This has been very inspiring. You can't go yet.
I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, that's good. So we'll take a couple of questions. Well, I think what we'll do is invite all speakers up.
Right.
And we'll open up the floor to all kinds of questions. As an old math teacher of mine said, questions wise, foolish, and in the middle.
I got to keep it on or off? Okay.
We need a-
Yeah, yeah.
How do we? That's okay. You can have a seat, I guess. So, are there questions you've not asked yet? Would like to ask now. This is an opportunity. All three of the speakers are here. Please.
Yes. Do you want a longer version of the talk?
Hey, y'all. Oh. Hello? Oh, hey, y'all. If no one else is going to ask questions, I might have 2 questions.
Sure.
The first is for the gentleman, well, maybe for everybody, but what are some of the most common mistakes you see people making with verification and validation in their food safety plans?
One of the most common mistakes I see is not doing proper validation because they don't know what it is and they don't think it applies to them. Second common mistake I see is that they've taken something that is done for somebody else and automatically transfer that. If the validation done for the chicken and poultry, you can apply for the almonds and nuts. Everything is different.
Also, it is. Can you hear me? It is not a one-off. You cannot just implement. You have to continuously train your people, and you have to be on top of the game because things can slip very quickly into bad practices. So continuous improvement and training is necessary.
And in my point, as an attorney, it's people not recording that they did their verification or not following the procedures that are outlined to conduct that verification appropriately. Because with FSMA, it all boils down to your records, their accuracy, and stating what you did.
I guess, can I ask one more?
Sure.
Does anybody else have a question? All right. Also, I'm grumpy and I don't like technology. I love keeping paper records, but do you see paper records becoming a thing of the past with blockchain and new technologies?
I think it's going to depend on your system and your company. Sure, if you switch to a blockchain solution, does that make the need for paper records obsolete? Potentially, probably, because it's not going to be on the block. It's not going to be able to be verified the way that it can and tracked the same way. But FDA is never going to say you can't keep paper records because small businesses especially don't always have the ability to make, use, and manage sophisticated computer-based paperwork and record management systems. So there will always be a place for them, and there will always be space for them in regulations, but that doesn't mean that if you adopt blockchain, they're going to be as useful as they are.
And if you want to make a paper record makes you grumpy, you have a lot of companies. I know several grumpy people. Because when something goes wrong with your computer, when the system crashes, it's a paper record that saves your bacon. And also a lot of companies do that. They have a paper record saved separately in the other facility. And regular stuff, within 24 hours, you have to make it available. So that's, same plant, same city, that's okay. But paper records are not going away for good.
Hello, my name is Ray, and I had a question probably for everybody, but it has to do with kind of the same concept about moving off of paper. My company is a family-run business, and it's about 50 years old. Getting to them to move to another technology is very painful. GFSI, that was a discussion. Going from the G10s on our cases, that was a discussion. It's always trying to push to get there. Do you have any pointers or any thoughts on how we get there willingly, without the government saying you have to do this, without our customers saying you have to do this? I'm usually at a loss and I lose the fight.
I would leave up to lawyer. When in doubt, talk to lawyer.
So, I mean, that's the challenge with any technology adoption. When I think about attorneys 10 years ago, you could take my BlackBerry from me for my cold dead hands, but now I use an iPhone. I think it's just training. A lot of it is training. A lot of it is open communication about why you're switching to a new technology or adopting a new technology, and making sure that you're there even if mistakes are made to help them correct them. It's more a people thing than, a focus on, well, FDA told us we had to do this, or our customers told us we have to adopt this new system. Just making sure that they know that you're there, and working with them through the glitches, because no technology adoption is seamless, no matter how sophisticated the company is.
And in my little experience, it's usually vendors and the customers who make you do things you don't want to do or have trouble doing, then FDA will ever make you do that.
I think there is a difference between enforcing something or reluctantly accepting something and actually embracing it. And this distance has to do with mindset and realizing that even if it is not in the next 2 or 3 years, digitization is coming. So the sooner one embraces it, the easier it is to be on this journey that is actually going to fuel the economy and businesses like yours, smaller businesses, family businesses.
And just another thought, there will be a generational shift in the food industry soon. There are a lot of younger people that we need to get interested and implemented into our working at our companies. And, they're much more willing to adopt new technologies and make things easier on themselves. If you can find a way that this technology or system makes it easier for them, all the better, so they can focus on more important things.
And my fear is that they would not know anything that is pre-Google, and you will find them in an extension publication of Iowa State University. So don't lose them.
All right, yeah, hello. My name is Ramiro Gallegos. I work for a raw material supplier, and my question is on FSMA. It seems like everything you were discussing has to do with relation to a certification that seems to be FCCS 2200. It seems that all the aspects are covered under that certification. So I was wondering, what is the difference between FSMA and that particular certification?
Let me put it this way. Have you been to a shopping mall and there's a mall cop?
Yes, of course.
Security?
Of course.
And then there's a police?
Yes.
That's the difference.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's by voluntary, but
Well, one is the industry adopted standards. They don't have a regulatory bite to it. FDA regulation has a regulatory bite to it. FSSC, the SQF, they have done good job trying to sort of harmonize. That's another good word people use. Their standards, some of them are even more stringent than the FDA standards. which I can understand. But one is the industry standards, which doesn't have a regulatory bite to it. Last one.
Hi, I'm Minto and I work at Washington State University. So I have a question, like if a company comes to me and give me the parameters, that these are the parameters we need to validate. So as a professor or university labs, do we have any other responsibility just to validate those parameters? Should we ask questions with the company to see like whether they are actually giving us the right parameters they're gonna validate, or we just validate what they give us and we write a report and give it back to them?
Do you want a short answer or you want a right answer?
Right.
Right answer, you should. That is your responsibility to, because they'll come with something they've gotten from somewhere else, they may not know. So if you notice something that is missing in there, it's your duty to recommend that. Short answer would be, if they're paying you enough money, do that and then do something else.
Yeah, and on the legal side, the company should be giving you good information because if their validation is not correct, that's a problem that they have, and FDA won't be afraid to enforce that.
But they may not have a complete information.
Right, exactly.
Okay, our time now is about up. I wanted to thank all of you and also encourage you to go to visit the various booths here that have a lot of information about the topic of this program. And I hope you benefit from what we've shared, information from our speakers, and we thank them very much for their efforts, and have a good rest of the show. Thank you very much.
My name is Andy Kennedy, and I am an advisor to the Global Food Traceability Center. And we'd like to welcome Mike Edgett, who's the Industry and Solution Strategy Director for Infor, and was one of the motivations for Traceability Central. Last year when I was walking around the show, I realized that there are all these technology companies out there scattered all throughout the through IFT. So I thought it'd be good to bring them all together so you could see all these great technologies. So he really helped inspire me to pull this together. So I'd like you folks to welcome Mike, and he will be talking to you about Infor. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's great to know that I'm inspiring people. That's a great way to start the day. So I'll give you a little information on Infor and myself, first of all. So as I said, I'm the Industry and Solution Strategy Director for Infor, focused on the food and beverage industry. Now, if you're not familiar with Infor, Infor is about a $3 billion+ company in the enterprise software space. We sell to a variety of industries, but one of the ones we focus on a lot is the food and beverage industry. And so a lot of the time that we spend is devoted a lot to the investment we can make in the food and beverage industry. My background is actually, I'm a chemist by training. Spent the first 10+ years of my life as a food technologist in companies like Quaker Oats and Borden's. And then I moved into more of a marketing role, also at Quaker Oats, and then with Bunge. So I've been with Bunge, Borden's, and Quaker Oats throughout my career. And then for the last half of my career, it's been much more focused in the enterprise software space. So kind of give you some background of what where my background is and what my interests are. So give you a little first, what I wanted to talk about first was, there's already been a lot of conversations about blockchain. And where's the future of blockchain? And especially when you're looking at traceability, people think, oh, traceability and blockchain, they're kind of one and the same, and that's where all traceability is going to go. And, you know, let's see if I can get this mouse to work. They actually brought this up in one of the other sessions not too long ago. You know, the idea, the first thing that got people thinking of blockchain being kind of the foundation of traceability had to do with this little project that Walmart did with IBM. And they wanted to figure out, how do I take product that in the past had taken me 7 days to go back and track back to where a mango came from and get that down faster. And they actually, through the work that they'd been doing, they got it down to 2.2 seconds, which is pretty impressive when you think about it. So going from something in the past that they tried to figure out where did this product come from, and to get that from seven days down to 2.2 seconds sounds great. And for those of us in technology, we think that's fabulous if we can roll it anywhere. But it gets a little bit more complicated when you get outside of just the world of produce. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And that's not to take away at all from what's going on here and going on in other areas of companies that are focused on trying to do more in the areas of blockchain. But like I said, today what I really want to talk about is how do you get yourself prepared for the future of traceability? Because I think traceability nowadays is a lot more than just, hey, where did my product go or where did my product come from? We need a lot more information than just simply that. But let me first, before we do that, talk a little bit about the current state of blockchain and where we see blockchain right now in the universe. So, you know, there's a lot of excitement. You know, the promise of the technology could transform the way we do business. Think if you could always trace anything back in like 2.2 seconds, that would be so slick. It's a long ways to go before we can do it with everything in the food supply chain, but it's a great idea. And there's a lot of big names out there putting time and effort into blockchain technology. You know, we've mentioned a few of them. You'll see there's a lot of other companies that are involved with IBM. You'll see blockchain also being used heavily in other manufacturing industries. It's really big on like aerospace and defense and automotive. So it's actually something that's continually being built out. And then my favorite is this last thing. I've got a lot of companies that are just worried that blockchain is going on and I'm missing the boat. And I've talked to probably too many people have said, my boss has said, what is our blockchain strategy? And usually the response back is, well, what do you really want to accomplish with it? So like any technology, it can provide some great opportunities, but we really need to look fundamentally as to what it really is and what we want to do. See, right now there's a lot of proof of concepts out there, a lot of stuff going on as it relates to numerous companies that are out testing the waters with various proofs of concept. But they're really still very much in the lessons learned stage. If you were actually in the presentation before this, there was a reference to how, for example, Walmart is now rolling their blockchain into just kind of the leafy green suppliers that are coming into them. Once again, this is just the next level in the testing that has to go forward to actually make blockchain something that's more fundamental. And of course, there's lots of press releases, lots of talks, and lots of people in partnerships. We're even, talking to a number of companies about how they want to envision blockchain. What do they see as the potential of blockchain within their business, and what do they want to see investing in the future as it relates to this? But the fact of the matter is there's really not a lot of return on investment yet. So aside from cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, which is kind of the foundation behind most of this, most everything else is really just still looking for a killer app. I mean, let's be honest, at the end of the day, some of the great things about traceability maybe are kind of cool, but I'm not sure what the business benefit of it is. I mean, another one that got a lot of press back in Thanksgiving was a couple turkey companies that could tell you what farm your turkey came from. I don't know why you'd care, except maybe it's a good marketing thing. It's nice to be that transparent, but I'm not sure that it provides a lot of quality benefits to your suppliers or your customers. So you got a lot of these projects though that are facing a lot of issues with scalability, adoption, and feasibility. The fact of the matter is, when you look at technology, it's often the technology we can figure out. It's the human behavior behind it to support it that takes a lot longer. So as the supply chain becomes much more complex, much larger than say just in a produce business, the opportunity that for someone within that supply chain to basically just not play along, all of a sudden it just screws up the whole concept of what blockchain is going to be able to do for you in this industry. So, and this is kind of what you see. This is, a lot of people, like I said, look at blockchain as traceability, especially if you're looking at it from some of the press that's been out there for the food industry. And the fact of the matter is it's a lot more than that. This was a research done by Deloitte just a few months ago. And now, in all honesty, this is more than just food companies. So they were looking at, I think, all different manufacturing companies. But a big point of them was still looking at it from the standpoint of transactions and payments. Okay, that was where they fundamentally saw the opportunity of blockchain. Next after that was much more some of the quality and traceability areas. But the point really is that blockchain is so much more than traceability. And if you look at it as just traceability, I think you're kind of missing the opportunity of what could be associated with it. So it's actually, I kind of go, yeah, we can do that, but, and it kind of reminds me, I was in Brooklyn a few weeks ago, and I'm walking down the streets in Brooklyn, street that look kind of similar to this, and I walk by and there's this coming up on this car, and the windows are all open, the sunroof's open, and they're blaring some music. Music's really loud. Didn't think anything of it until I got to the car and realized there was nobody in it. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. And then I look, and sure enough, there's like 3 or 4 people sitting on a balcony, like 2 floors up, listening to this music coming out of their car. So yeah, that worked, but it's probably not the most cost-effective and efficient way to get some music on your porch in Brooklyn. And it kind of reminds me, it was actually another quote by a gentleman at Gartner who made the comment that, you know, many of the goals companies believe blockchain will accomplish could be solved faster, less expensively, and better without invoking blockchain. So I don't want you to come away with this thinking that I'm telling you blockchain is bad. That's not it at all. But if your fundamental objective is to try to do the greatest job you can do when it comes to be able to handle some of the capabilities you want in traceability, there's other things you really need to do. So I want to talk about what I see as kind of the 4 foundations of companies that are really trying to get traceability to be more than just, hey, I know where my product came from, or I know where my product went. So I've highlighted really 4 or maybe really 5 things here. First is formula management. So that capability not only to know what your formulas are, but also having the processes behind them to better control them and manage them. Also having a robust quality management system in and of itself. You want more than just, you know, a simple quality management system. You want one that's flexible, that you can modify based on the needs that you have within your business. Then obviously you want to have basically that recall readiness, that fundamental capability that you think about from a track and trace area. And then the area a lot of people don't think about, which is actually equipment safety and maintenance. We spend a lot of time worrying about the products coming in, but we don't necessarily think about how do I keep track of all the equipment in the plant and how do I know what's going on. And at the end of the day, you want to tie these things all together. You want to make sure you've got a solution that's integrated and based on open standards. So let me look at a couple of these for you in a little bit more detail and explain a little bit about them. Some of these you may be familiar with and some you may not. And in just, you know, I want you to understand a lot of these are a combination of software solutions that are in the market and some commentary on processes that need to go against them. You'll find there's a number of companies in the marketplace that are able to support some of these things. If you want to make sure that they're all solutions that are very designed specifically for the food and beverage industry. So this is a good first example. So we're talking about greater confidence in your formulas and labeling. What I'm talking about from a foundation first is having what we refer to as a product lifecycle management software solution. Okay, there's a lot of PLM solutions out there. If you go out and research them and look at what the analysts say, a lot of the analyst coverage is not for food and beverage. It's much more other PLM systems, more from a discrete perspective. You're actually finding the solution that actually can manage it from a process manufacturing perspective. It's going to be able to take care of these core things that you want to be able to do. You want to be able to automate your label compliance, okay, including things like ingredients and nutritional statements. You're going to want to be able to eliminate all of those time-consuming processes of making sure things are legit. So in other words, I want to know that when I decide to create a product and now I want to sell it in Canada, but I've only been selling it in the US in the past, it's still legal to do that. And you want to have a system in place that allows you to flag that quickly, feel comfortable that what you're shipping out the end of the door is going to comply not only from an ingredients perspective, but even the label that goes against it on top of it. Then you also want to make sure that you've got guidelines that are set down at that material level. So in other words, if you want to make a claim that something is, let's say it's low salt, thinking about it because Morton's right there, something that's low salt, that doesn't mean you don't have any salt in the product. You want to make sure that you've got the capabilities for your solution to actually do the math, to actually tell you are you able to still make those claims and actually understand what those claims may be based on what specific part of the world or country you may be selling a product to. Then you also have those rules also regarding manufacturing. So some of those restrictions may apply not only to where you ship a product, but then also fundamentally to where you can manufacture it. But the last point there is kind of fundamental to when you look at it from the standpoint, if I want to trace things, it's you want to have your lot control. To put it bluntly, it's got to be meaningful. And some of the problems that we've seen in the produce area, and the reason the produce has become so big as an issue, is the lots are kind of mingled together. The lot is, this is today's production, okay? So you've got to figure out how you want to start defining those lots so you can better break them down when you do go back and trace. You don't want to put a full day's production on hold because you don't have a good way to break that out. And it's not anything new for us. We've dealt it in certain segments of the food industry for years. I mean, if you think about like the dairy industry, we don't keep each farm that comes in and kind of keep them in little tiny silos when we process milk. We load them together, but we still find ways to segment that throughout the day and segment with various lots as they come in, so you still have the capability to be able to do that properly. The next area kind of feeds into that in the sense of having a robust quality management system, okay? There's a lot of systems out there for quality management. You can look through what is out there, and you got to kind of see what you need for your specific business, because it can vary an awful lot. But fundamentally, what you want to make sure you've got is something that allows you to specify your test requirements. Not only it's not across the board. You want to be able to customize those. You want to know what are the test requirements that you've got to have for a specific product, maybe based on a specific customer. So the needs of one customer may be very different than a different customer, even though fundamentally they're the same product that you're trying to ship out the door. You want to be able to make sure that you've got those requests that can be triggered for inspection based on receipt of materials. What I mean by that is you may decide that after you've had a trusted supplier for a number of years and they're providing you the lab data ahead of time, you may not want to do the same sort of test data when they come in the door. You're just going to trust them to do it. You bring a new vendor on board, you may have different attitudes about that. Even though it's the same fundamental product you're buying from them, you may want to put higher test data throughout that whole thing than you've had before. Now you may be saying, okay, I get all this, but now you've lost me. I don't understand what it has to do with traceability. Fact of the matter is, when you trace back, you want to be able to trace back not just what the product is, you want to understand what kind of testing you've done of those ingredients or the entire finished product throughout the test, the whole procedure. So when you think about that, yes, I guess we could capture all of that as part of blockchain, but then you're going to have to determine who defines what that is and what has to be captured. And if it varies by individual product, that gets pretty complex. So the important thing is you want to make sure whatever tool you've got to trace your products throughout its life cycle also is able to capture that quality metrics that you've done with an individual products throughout its process. And then obviously you want to manage things like customer specifications. One of the slick things people don't think about often is when we're selling products, especially if you're in a B2B environment, you may not necessarily want to carry, definitely don't want to carry a specific SKU for every single customer if you don't have to, even though each customer may have slightly different requirements from a specification perspective. So a good quality management system should allow you to be able to segment that out. So in other words, if you've got one product and your range for specific parameters this wide, but you've got a customer that's only this wide for that parameter, you ought to be able to pick out those products out of production that just met those and not have to carry multiple SKUs. So that's an opportunity to lower your inventory costs, but also meet the requirements you have from your customers. And then a number of other things as it relates to alerts and triggers, and obviously you want to be able to bring in lab requests and collect data. Now the thing that most people think about when it comes to traceability is a good trace engine. I want to trace forward and backward within the supply chain. I want to see where I made a product, what products need to be placed on hold. I want to be able to look and see kind of visual aids to make it easier. There's a lot of tools out there for traceability. This is a picture of our graphical lot tracker, and other than me reading all these bullets, let me just show you a couple things instead. So this gives you an example of what this looks like from Infor. And like I said, anybody that's in this space, if you've got, and this is going to be integrated within your ERP, if they don't have a slick traceability engine, you want to ask them when they're going to start building that in, because it's something you fundamentally need, and it's got to be able to pull in the other data like I mentioned. So you want to be able to pull in the quality metric data to go along with it, so it makes sense for you at the end of the day. So here, I'm not sure how easy that is to see from back there, but what we've highlighted there in blue, that's basically a finished good and the specific customer that bought it, okay? And it gives in there, and it tells you things like what the product is and the lot number and so forth. And what you're able to do is actually go back in the chain simply by looking at it graphically. So now what it's highlighting is that is the fundamental product that we produced and its lot number. And now all these other things way to the right are all the other customers that got that same product that was a problem for you. And actually you could go so far as to scroll back and actually look at the individual components on the other side of it also. So you can see what each individual raw material is that goes back. So if you're interested, I can show you more about that. I mean, we could go through and hit each section and it highlights what more you can actually get, but it also gives you the fundamental detail behind it. So this is actually the components. If you went to that next stage in that chain that I just showed you, it shows you the bulk ketchup that we made, but it also shows you each of the packaging materials that went into that, producing that product. And if you were to go so far as to click on the specific lot number, then it will bring you up information on what's the lab results against that, what was the process that we used to make that. So that's the stuff that allows you to quickly look back, but actually capturing all that stuff you need fundamentally if you really want to take your traceability to the next level. And this is just going the full way the other direction. So with those 7 customers that I mentioned, here's the detail on those 7 customers. It shows you exactly what you sent them, shows you that they are all that lot number that we talked about. And actually in our solution, you actually have the capability, if you want to, you can actually send an email out to all these people and say, please put this stuff on hold, we think there's an issue. And in the same token, on a solution like this, we can go all the way back and determine everything else that's been made from a suspect raw material and isolate that also. So it does give you that quick confidence to put it behind. And like I said, we do a lot of this graphically because we find that's much more easy for someone to use. And it also makes it something that's very universal for us to be able to use, frankly, around the globe. And then, like I said, the last area that people don't think about quite as much is the whole idea of managing your equipment. So there are a lot of asset management tools out there. And you see, probably a lot of you have them. You may not even know you have them. They're out in your facility trying to help your plant managers or your maintenance managers try to maintain equipment properly. The problem is often these things sit out there in a silo. So they're not something that's actually speaking to the rest of your business systems. So you don't necessarily capture some of the same information. So think about that. If you want to know, contrary to what we've talked about way back at the beginning when I was talking about blockchain and people were thinking, you know, the mindset really was the problem with this product is at the source. Well, we've all been in the food industry long enough to know the problem is not always at the source. It isn't necessarily the raw material. It may be something that happened within your manufacturing process itself. And this allows you to start to see that. So now if you've tracked this together, you can see whether or not equipment is being maintained properly throughout the business, throughout the manufacturing process. It helps you get to see whether or not you've got the stats that you need for various certification requirements. It even can start to be used if you're trying to get bigger push towards sustainability initiatives and environmental initiatives. All of these are things that you can pull out of a good enterprise asset management solution. But at the end of the day, none of this stuff, I think, really is as powerful if they sit in isolation. You've got to get all of these products to work together in a uniform area. And frankly, going back to the first comment about blockchain, you're going to be able to have to do it then too, because the underlying foundation of blockchain is you're going to have to be in a position where you can easily share that stuff on the cloud. Yes, as a commercial, obviously Infor supplies all of this stuff, okay? But probably if you're working with your software vendor, they provide some of this stuff too. And I'm not telling you we don't want to talk to you and we don't want to sell you stuff, we do, but I want you to make sure you always talk to your, whoever your IT lead is within your organization, explain to them what you're struggling with, because I deal with IT leadership all the time, and I don't think they always know the pain points that your people like yourself are going through on a day-to-day basis, and your expectations, both from a development perspective and a quality perspective. So utilize your IT company, your IT leadership within your organization to figure out what you can do, and then we can always help, as can other vendors, to help supplement what you have in place to make it even better. But fundamentally, that always gives you, like I said, the foundation to get all the information out, foundation for traceability. And often you want to have these so they support standards for things such as growing initiatives, such as blockchain. So at the end of the day, so what's traceability today? You know, don't wait for blockchain, but be ready to support it. So keep it in mind that blockchain is something fundamentally that may be really beneficial to us in the future. I think if you look at most analysts, they're going to tell you the real benefit is 5, 10 years away, okay? Which sounds like a long time, but let's be honest, in the world, that could go by really, really quick. So you want to make sure you're keeping that all in mind as it relates to trying to develop or having solutions in place that are based on open standards, and also that all your systems start to talk together. But also start looking at traceability as much more than I want to quickly isolate a problem. Look at it as actually a number of areas that you can help your companies define what they want to accomplish by our better visibility of traceability. So it could be just simply compliance. Yes, I want to be able to meet however I define things, whether it's from a FSMA perspective that I said I was going to do these various things, or maybe some other associations you're associated with that you want to do things with. But it may also be information. You've got a lot of companies that are looking at traceability, so they want to provide greater information. So in other words, back to the example earlier of the turkey companies that were telling everybody which farm their turkey came from, you want to do that for a lot of products, and we're seeing more and more companies that are wanting to provide that information. But you can't do that unless you trace all that information from the beginning and try to capture all of that within your business. And frankly, at the end of the day, this can be a real differentiator for you. If you really are taking the traceability to its full extent and understanding all the information you can capture. So then what we really like to think is you can actually start to treat traceability not as some quality requirement, but traceability and being really good at this, really you can start to treat traceability and quality as a competitive advantage. So hopefully that helps. Thanks for your time. There's my contact information. Feel free to, I'll take a few questions if there are any, or also we've got a booth over at 212 if anybody wants to stop by and ask any questions. So, Andy, any questions?
So Mike, what kind of companies do you work with, and have you seen an uptick in interest in traceability in the marketplace?
Yeah, we have. Well, like I said, what we've seen is an uptake in people wanting to capture more information in traceability. That graphical lot tracking thing that you showed you, the little graphical thing, we've had that for decades. And it was actually kind of something we actually created with one of our customers who wanted to make traceability something they really could compete on. They actually used it as a marketing tool so they could show everybody where their products came from. But now we're seeing companies saying, I need to understand how I can capture more data from a supply chain perspective so I can actually show where it came from. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.